Welcome to a special edition of Cannesversations. I'm Eliana, and I wanted to just first start off by saying that unfortunately many things have happened in life, and we haven't been able to get to the Les Enfants du Paradis episode, but instead we're coming to you with a new special edition episode of our top 10 picks from 2023. For this special episode, we invited our friends Öykü Sofuoğlu and Lawrence Garcia to join us in discussing our top 10 films. Öykü is a critic and PhD student based in Paris whose writing has appeared in magazines such as the Turkish Altyazı, Movie Notebook, and the French feminist publication Scorcese. This is the first time on the podcast for Lawrence, who is also a PhD student in Toronto and a film critic, whose writing regularly appears in magazines such as Reverse Shot, Movie Notebook, CinemaScope, and in Review Online. The format will be as follows. Each of us will discuss our top 10 favorite films of the year in reverse order, starting with the number 10 top film. Thank you for joining us.
Perhaps just so the many listeners know about this constellation, due to our festival attendances, we've come to become like loose friends on the festival circuits, and with each new festival one meets new faces and one gets to know new people, and Öykü and Lawrence have become really the faces I look out for when there's a big crowd, and I try to find people to discuss the most recent experiences I've had in the cinema. So yeah, really cool to have you guys here.
Yeah, that's good to be here.
Elle, what's on our schedule for today?
So we've had a year in cinema. I don't know how many films people have seen, how many things you have been looking out for in general, and how many festivals you've attended, as well as just talking later about our top films in a very broad sense, because I believe each one of us does a slightly different circuit, different exposure, or just looking at different things in films. I think one thing that we do somehow share is we're not always looking at the biggest blockbuster hit, but curious to see what you've been watching this year and what's stood out in general.
Yeah, a lot of acquired taste on our list. I think, Öykü, for instance, you've been at a lot of festivals this year, no? I mean, whenever I would check Twitter, I would see you are in another city in a different country. And could you perhaps just tell us a bit about that and how, as a critic, this year has been for you?
I mean, not in every festival I had been as a film. Of course, I was there as a film critic, but for example, in Locarno, I was in Locarno Critics Academy. So we had this really amazing program of meeting filmmakers and having workshops. So it definitely gives you a different vision of the festival, more from the inside maybe. And that's why I kind of missed a lot of films that I could have watched if I were there as a mere film critic, just attending the festival. Of course, like quantity of films, like amount of films that you watch is not really important when you go to film festival. And it feels like really overwhelming, I think, going to one film festival to other all the time. But I think since the big ones like Cannes, Venice, and Berlin kind of have at least some spaces between them, helps you to digest and look back and think about what you liked or not. And when I look back to my top 10 list or the films I liked the most, I kind of feel like Berlin stood out for me. And I also telling this to Ellie before, I remember talking about in previous years, like having this COVID effect on films, as if we'd have so many good films after COVID in the following years in 2022, 2021, but it didn't kind of happen, right? But this year, when I was making my list of favorite films or the films I liked the most, I had kind of difficulty of picking, because I felt that there were more good films comparing to previous years. What I want to say is that previous years I had more really good, amazing films, but they were really few. But this year, I had more favorites, I guess. Like that's from my side, how the things were actually.
Mm-hmm.
I was also wondering because Lawrence, for you, that was the first time at the Berlinale, was it not?
Yeah, it was my first time going to Berlin because I'd been to Cannes before, but I've never been to Venice, and I still haven't been to Venice. But Berlin was my first time, and it was an interesting experience. I think I didn't watch as many of the competition titles, but maybe that was for the better based on other reactions to it. But I would agree that looking back on the year and in terms of the films that ended up on my list, like Berlinale surprisingly was still had a good sort of representation on the final list. Whereas usually I feel like Cannes sometimes like crowds out those films, but this year maybe that didn't happen. I don't know if it was similar for you, Patrick or Eliana.
Yeah, and I think the reason for that is that Berlinale has the forum section. You know, it's somewhat, I think, comparable to perhaps the Wavelength in Toronto, that there are these more daring films that you don't really see, for instance, in Venice. You know, in Venice, you hardly see experimental cinema, for instance. And even Cannes, you know, they don't have a like dedicated section that caters for those kind of films. So it's great to have the Berlinale Forum, which is also just the curation there is pretty great. And if we talk about the Berlinale, we should also talk about Calo Chatrian, and that he's going to be out after this year's, well, it's not yet 2024, but maybe at the time you, dear listener, are listening to this, and there will be his last year. And I think with these side sections, he has improved the Berlinale. In fact, there was this new Encounters section, which also has sometimes more interesting titles, for sure, than the competition. So it'll be interesting to see how the new grand person behind the Berlinale, that is Miss Tuttle, how she's gonna sort of take on her role and interpret that. Yeah.
But already this year, the forum has changed, right? The forum director is now different.
It's true. Yeah. They are sort of separate. They are not, it's not just that one person, of course. Yeah, you're right. And for you, Eliana, it was also your first Berlinale, right? Even though not really, you know, as a critic, but...
I barely got to experience this year's Berlinale, actually. I think I only saw 4 or 5 films maybe, but I do have to say one of them made it into my top 10, which is one that was exciting in a different sense, but I have, or no, 2. No,
we'll see.
Well, I'm confused. We'll see. But yes, this is the episode of the podcast where we cheat on other festivals other than Cannes. And I did also attend one film festival that I wanted to talk briefly about, called the 5 Flavors Film Festival, that happens in Warsaw, Poland. That's run by a friend, Łukasz. And I was on the international people's jury, which was quite lovely. And the film festival it was a similar experience, I suppose, to you. They have 38 programmed films, so it's a smaller film festival that's curated. They have 3 different people who are curating, who all come from different backgrounds. One person, I think there's more of an interest in art house and experimental. The other person is more mainstream, and the last person focuses more on programming with a social message, and there's always an educational twist to it. And like you, I didn't get to see many of the films because there were some workshops here and there, but a few of the films really surprised me and stuck with me and made it to top end of the year films. So some of them perhaps were from 2022, so bending this best of 23 understanding. But it was a lovely experience because I think really one can discover a new film festival every day if they wanted to.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it reminds me a bit of, I think when I studied in New York for a semester, because I studied literature, and we discussed the book market in the US especially. And I think it was said that there are like more book awards, for instance, than, I don't know if it was like new publications. It was really a crazy idea to me that there are more awards than there are like serious titles. And I think the same goes for festivals, that there are so many festivals that until recently I haven't even heard of. And I'm sure there are still a lot more that I've never heard of. And I think my opinion has changed so much because it hasn't been for so long that I'm sort of at least adjacent to this entire game. And I would not have thought that back then, maybe that these small festivals still have a lot to offer and actually often much more interesting cinema than these big festivals. As an outsider, I think, oh, those are the things that are rejected somewhere, don't make it. And then these festivals are sort of the ones that take it. But as we will see later, there's, for instance, a great title that was not accepted at Cannes and that made it then to Locarno. And I think that happens a lot. And especially with the Berlinale, for instance, they're now trying to be a more financially viable festival as well, and try to allure more talent that is known by a lot of people, like more prominent figures at the festival. It's good to have something like Locarno. That is, of course, still like sort of an elite festival, but that is not as much, I don't know, focused on getting the big names. And it's good to have those festivals.
I can also add some personal insights from that, because I had the chance to like be in these European festivals that would be defined as this middle level film festivals like Ihlava or Ghent Film Festival, that actually contribute so much to the culture and the social life of the city. And I think it's such a privilege to be able to observe that and recognize and get to know the identity of the festival and how it interacts with its public. And I really enjoy this process, sometimes much more than the film the festival offers. And and after getting the chance to like interact with people, programmers, people who are invited to these festivals, you really get to understand that this is how a festival should work, not just like running around in Cannes or Venice trying to make your screening. It's not only about like watching films, because every time I go to a festival and then 3 months later, I always have the urge to go see these films again, because at the end, these impressions are not really everlasting, because you're so in a hurry running around trying to work. But like these festivals like Locarno, Biennale, which I have never been to, but I'm hoping to go to next year, like they have really positive, I think, images as film festivals in Europe.
Yeah, and they also sort of foster the conversation and have big names invited there just for masterclasses or Q&As and talks. And I think that contributes so much as well to the discourse. Yeah, perhaps should we, if that's okay with you, because we also have to look at the time, and I think we could just get lost in those kind of conversations. And I was thinking we could mention the films that did not make it on our list, but, might as well have. Lawrence, do you have a few titles that come to mind?
Yeah, I can go through like the honorable mentions, as it were. The first one, which is just on the edge, would be Music, the Schanalec film, Angela Schanalec. I really loved I Was at Home, but her previous film. And this one, which I like quite a bit, but didn't quite make it in the top 10.
Yeah, that first shot alone, that first shot is so ingrained on my mind.
Yeah. The other one is Our Body, Notre Corps, the Claire Simone film, which I think we'll be hearing about again. Human Surge 3, Teddy Williams, Eduardo Williams. In Water, the Hong film that was at Berlin Encounters, I believe. And then the other one, this is a bit of a cheat because it's not like a feature length, but who cares, is the Wes Anderson, the Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar. So this is one of the Netflix ones. I've been a bit frustrated with his work recently, and I think some people share that, but actually the Netflix series sort of got me back on board, and I think this is the best of them. Yeah, so that's just 5 titles for me.
Oh, and perhaps on this last one, would you share this opinion that many people said that if he doesn't have to write so much, like if the script isn't by him, if is something that he can take from an original source that sort of benefits his vision?
I'm not sure if I would quite put it that way, but maybe that did help in this case. I think what I found fascinating about this one is the way that his usual very like meticulous mise en scène, the staging and everything was integrated with a kind of self-consciousness about how the story was being presented. I don't know if you have seen the films, but here you have the people narrating, but they will also like go into asides where they speak the dialogue. And I found that like a very interesting, like sort of twist in like the story is sort of happening in real time, but they're also like building the sets up in real time with the narration. And so it's like the narrative as a kind of process of construction was I think really interesting in this one. Whereas I think in the features that at least the recent ones like Asteroid City, everything is already sort of there in a way that is maybe a little harder to, at least for me, to sort of understand why he's doing what he's doing. Whereas here, because like everything is being built up in real time and you're seeing just parts and wholes interacting, there was something else there for me that I quite liked.
All right. And Öykü or Eliana, whoever wants.
I am going to be brief because I'm just confused by the concept of tops, like top films in general. But one of them would be Amiko, which I saw at the Five Flavors Film Festival. It was a very lovely film by Yusuke Morii, a Japanese film about a girl who is just different. I think one can look at it as a curious portrayal, perhaps, of otherness, if we are going to use this term neurodivergent, but it's never said. But one can look at this film through that lens. But it's a girl who goes through life at a beat of her own drum. Her parents have just experienced some form of loss of a child, and no one ever really talks to her, and she doesn't know what's going on. There are a lot of little mysteries that unfold visually, but also in a way that leaves the viewer figuring out why is this child like, trying to figure out why the child is like this, why she is left in the dark. And ultimately it's because the adults around her are not necessarily communicating to her. But it plays with genre too. It's a bit musical. It's a bit, I think I'm not being so brief after all. But Amiko was very interesting. And it's set against the soundtrack of Ichigo Aoba music, who is someone who's emerged recently in Japanese and experimental music and sound. And the next one would also probably be music, which Lawrence mentioned, and Do Not Expect Too Much from the End of the World by Radu, Jude. And Sparta, which is 2023 or 22, was also something that intrigued me because I think I like seeing depravity. This is the Ulrich Seidl film. That's a bit of a diptych with the film from the previous year, Rimini, that shows the other brother's point of view and his struggles. And I just saw The Human Search 3, and I haven't been able to figure out where to place. We'll talk about it later, but I found it incredible. But I'm going to turn it over to you, Öykü.
I also really find it difficult to choose films and like even give numbers like first I like this most and second and third. It's really hard. But when I was trying to do the list, I thought about the films that really touched me personally. So some really good movies had to be left out, such as, I don't know, Evil Doesn't Exist from Hamaguchi. It was a film that I also really liked after thinking about it, because I mean, it's not a really open movie. It's kind of closed box. And after reflecting upon these characters, this environment, it grows a lot on you. And these are the movies that really stays with me. And Evil Does Not Exist was a film like that. And of course, there's really good films that it became a consensus for most of the people, like Poor Things. I really liked it, but it didn't kind of felt that it should be on the top 10, because I don't know, it would, everyone will somehow appreciate it at the end. And like Killers of the Flower Moon. And Ceylan was also in my maybe, I'm not sure, type of films, because some more personal political reasons that I don't want to elaborate in such a short duration of a podcast. But yeah, I think my titles were like that. And maybe I can say Devos here was also an honorable mention.
Yeah, and for me, I have quite a list, I think, of 10 or so. So I just want to squeeze them in here. But I also want to say that, as you may have noticed, if you are if you're well informed, we have already mentioned some titles that are 2022 titles, and that's going to be the case here, because there are some films also that will never really get distribution or a proper coverage. So we'll just use what we saw this year, basically. And I think just before I get into my little list here, it's just that I wanted to just briefly talk about, so Film Comment has made this list on the best films without distribution. And to me, I feel like that's what do you call, like a twofold blade or something? Like what do you call it?
Double-edged sword.
Double-edged
sword, thank you. Because on the one hand, of course, it's good also just to bring these films and the people behind it on other people's radar and map. But at the same time, I wish those films were somewhat on their official list, like not on the list that is the best films of the year, because then it sort of prioritizes the films that already have distribution. I also see I see why they would do it. So yeah, they get attention for people who might be interested in buying them or distributing them. But yeah, I wish, because there are so many films like The Human Search 3, for instance, that is on their number 1 there. There's Eureka. There's even Close Your Eyes by Iris. And I feel like I wish they had not this separate list, but they had this universal list that includes them all, and then they pick the best ones. It's also just not that fun to see the same titles again and again. But I don't know if you have an opinion on that.
I think it's a bit of a pragmatic point, partly because the people who are voting in general full disclosure, like I voted for this list as well. But I think it's a pragmatic point in the sense that a lot of the people voting in this poll are not necessarily able to travel to film festivals. So a lot of the critics based in North America are not necessarily traveling to Venice, Cannes, Locarno. And so they really won't have gotten a chance to see some of these films. And so if you combine them, they just won't be there. Like some of the undistributed films just won't be there because a lot of the people voting will just not have seen them. And I think in the case of the undistributed list, you have, in some sense, like a smaller subset of those people voting for the poll who do travel to film festivals and are voting for them. So it's more just like a pragmatic thing. It's like, yeah, you will have the films on the undistributed list. And so you have distributors are like, oh, we should pick this up and release it. And while having an undistributed list has the danger of like ghettoizing them and making them like a kind of separate thing, the difficulty is that if you combine the lists, they just might not make it at all. And so that's the counterpoint, I guess.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, it's difficult. I can't think of a proper way of dealing with that. But I then also think that sometimes the very best films of the year also just then never getting this full attention, of even like a Kelly Reichardt film that made it on number 2, I think, of their list this year, of the official list. But yeah, in any case, there was just something I wanted to have somewhat placed here. So the films I want to mention are Burak Form of Forgetting that I saw at the Berlinale. And yeah, great pick of the forum section. Then I really liked Lee Jong-hong's A Wild Rumor that I only got to see through L. So thanks for that. Elena Navariani's Blackbird, Blackbird, Blackberry that played at Cannes. And yeah, a great sort of new interpretation of mythic text that somewhat reminded me of another filmmaker from North Macedonia who made God Exists. Her name is Petronia, among other things. And they sort of have set themselves on a similar, I think, of re-examining how traditions work, how females are sort of looked at in society, and they do that by, addressing rituals or traditions and texts that are ancient old and give them sort of a new outline. I really liked Angela Schaнаlec's music as well. Lisandro Alonso's Eureka, that I suppose I haven't met a person yet who was completely, in line with the third part of the film, but the first two were all the more impressive. And yeah, I could have watched that for much longer. Then there's a sort of, even by the standards of our podcast here, arcane choice that is De Facto by Selma Doborak. It's a sort of reenactment project, and I've been really interested in a reenactment film. This is about the crimes of the Nazis, but in a way that is very anonymous. So they use actual texts they have researched, and they let them be interpreted without real emotion by two actors. And they have a sort of conversation with each other where it's not so much a conversation, but it's a monologue followed by another monologue where they just talk about the crimes they committed and how it's sort of nonchalant without any feeling. It's portrayed. Then there's a stone that goes well together with Remembering Every Night. So two Japanese films of young directors that both played at the Berlinale Forum as well and pursue very similar themes. So there's a stone by Tatsunari Ota and Yui, I will butcher these names completely, Yui Kiyohara, Remembering Every Night. Yeah, very similar films. They're just really tracing these people and what kind of, they're tracing people who trace people, basically. And this is a very fascinating thing to watch. Then, thanks to Lawrence, I saw Kid Zohar's This Closeness, that I wouldn't have thought that a film from South by Southwest makes it here, but there we go. Very, very young filmmaker, and it's really impressive. I didn't know that she was also the lead actor in that film. So there's a lot to expect from her as well. Todd Haynes, May December. I have the inkling that we will talk about that today as well. And Aki Kaurismäki's Fawn Leaves. So yeah, those are my films. Yeah, do we have a system? Yeah, perhaps Öykü, would you like to start?
I think mine was Yannick because I also made a numbered list for Altyazı and I put Yannick in the 10th place. As I was saying before, I really wanted to give some space for films that would go overlooked, but that I thought really important for me. And Yannick was one of them. I really find Dupuis cinema fascinating. Him being a director whose films are mostly focused on humor and comedy, and being in all the festival circuits, and whether it be Cannes, Venice, and this particular film, since it's about cinema itself and about being a spectator in a theater, the situation of being taken hostage really intrigued me about and made me question, like I think like it did for everyone else, made me question about my own situation as a spectator while watching a movie, while still watching a movie. And it's really meta in such a clever and funny way. I think it was an amazing film for me.
Yeah. I also got to see Yannick. I think it's somewhere on my list as well. The premise is a man goes to the theater. The theater is actually les Bouffes, Théâtre des Bouffes Parisiennes. Bouffe really... being like bouffe as in like bouffa or like funny. It's the word, from this word we get farce. And so it was established by Offenbach. This is a little bit of an aside, but it was established by Jacques Offenbach. And his work has often, a critic once said that, it's a charming piece of nothing. Charming piece of nonsense, excuse me. And so this man is a parking attendant. He goes to the theater for his night off. He spends 45 minutes going to the theater and 15 minutes walking to the theater. And in the middle of the production, he says, what are you doing? He stands up and he says, this is all really bad. I'm not going to tolerate this anymore. And he demands that things change. I don't know how much to give away, but it was very funny. Lots of funny moments. Essentially, like you say, playing with the hostage situation. He also is armed. And I think
I also loved how accessible the movie was to different levels of spectator. It's not like I'm of course telling this, it's such a meta film, but I am sure that lots of people, without knowing that this kind of thinking or reflection, would also enjoy Yannick. And I think it's really important to have that when you're talking about art movies, like who are these films made for? And Yannick definitely like ticks all the boxes in that sense.
Yeah, I think Dupieux really knows because the film was also made in secrecy or something like this while he was doing Dali. And it's less than an hour long. And I think that really appeals to long-term cinema goers or people who are just passing by and they want to see something that's just entertaining. Yeah, that's a nice number 10.
Yeah, I did not have a chance to see that film, but I did see Dali, and that was one of the crazier experiences I had in Venice because there the audience was all in for him. Of course, some didn't get they don't get what he's up to, and then it's a bit frustrating for them. I felt, at least, based on like anger they expressed as well. But most of the people were just, they were just frenetic, really.
I don't think I've actually seen any of Dupieux's films, but this is the most I've ever come to being interested in. So maybe I will catch up with it. It does help that it's under an hour.
It's a charming piece of nonsense. Very absurd. Yeah.
Okay, and for you, Eliana, what's your top 10?
It's Passages by Ira Sachs. So this is the Berlinale film that made it.
Well, actually a Sundance film, but then it also played at Berlinale.
Okay, Thank you. This is the Sundance film that appeared at the Berlinale. And now it's on Mubi streaming. And this is just a film that when I think about it, it makes me, I think you have an art house. Is he an art house filmmaker? He's trying to orchestrate his film, and he does what he wants to do. He's very much, he wants to be in control, and he also is going between his long-term partner and entertaining Adèle Exarchopoulos. I can't say anything right now. Yes.
But perhaps we should mention who's the lead actor.
The lead actor is Franz Rogowski. And his long-term partner is played by Ben Whishaw, and Adèle Exarchopoulos plays the what I see as like a continuation of her role in Blue is the Warmest Color in some sense. Plays
still
the
a
woman
teacher
who somewhat, yes, she's still a teacher, who derails him to a degree, but he, Franz Rogowski's character, who's named Thomas, is still always in control and sort of in a very toxic way, floating between these two people. And I'm sure we've all seen sort of triangles of love. I think what makes this one special to me is just the interior design and the costume and the way that the textures and the skin and
the outfits.
I have heard some people saying like, oh, this is very European centric. This is an American man from Tennessee who would like to make a film that shows his devotion and love towards European art house cinema. And I can see that too, but for some reason this film did it for me. The compositions were especially, to me, quite curious and appealing, where just what we see and what we don't see. The heads of people that are cut off, the backs of people's heads, the physicality of the actors, and just how they navigate through space. There's a large blown up poster of Watteau's Pierrot, and this, I can't talk in a very smart way about why I like this film, but it appealed to me. And yeah. Did you all get to see Passages as well?
I also bought the Franz Rogowski's top for. Sorry. I'm sorry. I'm just like lowered the level of discussion after Watteau. But yeah, I get this mesh top for Christmas. I saw it on Movie Notebook's Christmas gift guide. Yeah, I couldn't help myself. Yeah.
Now, I was going to ask, how did you ID the top? But it makes sense that Movie has it on their list. I like the film as well. Maybe not as much as his previous films. I think my favorite scene in the film, or the one that I still remember anyway, is the one where Franz Rogowski's character meets the parents of Adele Exarchopoulos, and like the sort of negotiations that happen, because he's kind of this ridiculous, very like overbearing and like German character, and I guess the expectations from these very French parents are very different from what they want for their daughter. It's like, who is this person who my daughter wants to marry? And I think I like the sort of social dynamics that are typically in his films. This one oddly felt like more underpopulated than his other films. Like, that's maybe the standout, but in general, it's more about the three characters, whereas usually the social world is a bit stronger, I feel like. But yeah, no, I still enjoyed it, though there's not as much sex as you would expect or hope for from the I don't know. It was rated like NC-17, I think, in the US, which is why I mentioned that, because it's like a really oddly like not high rating. Like, yeah. Anyway.
Sorry. Then it's the US, no? How about you, Lawrence? What is your number 10?
My number 10 is Totem by Lila Aviles. So it premiered in Berlin competition. So it's one of the only comp films I saw at Berlin. But I think I found it really strong, especially after her previous film, even though it's very different in style. Like, the first one has much more locked down, static compositions. Here, the camera is very mobile, and it's sort of within this family setting. But I think what I found most striking was how it sort of tethered to the subjectivity of the child, who is the main character, and sort of conveyed her perspective and her sort of sense of this world where something is about to change, because her father is having this last birthday party and he's about to die, essentially. But it's like the sense of a world about to change, but she doesn't quite understand what is going on. And I think that sort of ambivalence is, or like, and like she knows something is changing, but she doesn't quite understand it, was quite moving. And the movie gets that across like pretty strongly.
I think we actually saw that together. I also found it strong, and I still didn't make it to catch up with the other film. I think, if I'm not mistaken, isn't that about a cleaner, like a hotel cleaner or something?
Yeah, the chambermaid. It's about like a chambermaid who works in like this hotel in Mexico City. Yeah.
Yeah, and I liked in this film here as well, like you talked about, like assuming the perspective of the child, and then even I think the camera would go up like on a like cabinet or something, or and like it would be very close, and it would also pay close attention to these rituals there at the party. And yeah, I think it was a very slow but steady exploration of this sort of setting there. And I couldn't even tell because, and I think that's always a good sign, that I couldn't even quite make out what kind of culture that is. Because if that is the case, if I cannot make that out, that perhaps means that they did it right, that they don't have to like give me any explanation of what's going on. It's just I'm thrown in there, and I appreciated that very much. Any of you have the chance to see that as well?
I saw Totem, and there was another competition movie which was centered on a kid. It was, I think, 200.
200 bees.
Species of
Yeah.
bees. And I don't know why, but like a lot of people around me preferred the 200 species of bees, whereas I was really personally touched by Totem. It's really stood out in competition in Berlin, and I also really enjoyed it too.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing it if I have the chance at some point.
And I'm taking your responsibility to ask you what was the movie in your 10th place, Patrick?
Mine was actually a 2022 film that is Antoine Bouche's Concrete Valley, a Parisian-born filmmaker who I think is based in Vancouver now, and I think he also works as a professor there. I think, Lawrence, you had a great piece in CinemaScope on that film with an interview with the filmmaker. And
yeah, I interviewed him for CinemaScope last year when it played in Toronto at Wavelengths, and then it played in Vancouver. But yeah, he's based in Vancouver now, although the film is set in Toronto. Yeah,
right. And there in the sort of immigrant milieu, right? He's like the protagonist. His family comes from Syria, I think. And this film seems to be very much about language, and I always like films that are about language. They sort of speak imperfect English. It sort of starts off with in English class, and I think it's very slow, and it's very patient with the people there. And at the moment, I'm also working in that kind of environment as a language teacher, and a lot of little aspects hit home for me. And yeah, I like when the language is imperfect. I love that, for instance, very much in the Before films, when Julie Delpy's English is always, or like often slightly off, and it's even part of the script, and then it becomes a point of mentioning that she cannot swear properly in English or something like that. And here it's also, it sort of adds to there is something underlying this entire study of these characters, of this family, but in particular of this guy. I think he's a physician, or he used to be, and now he cannot really work in that occupation, or like he cannot take on that occupation, but he tries nonetheless. So there's this scene that I won't forget when he's just at his neighbor, who asks him, or who tells him about some pain she has, and then he he assumes responsibility for that, and he tries to cure that in some sense. And it's so awkward, this scene. But what I love about this is that this protagonist is totally unaware of the awkwardness, the way he's sitting there on the couch, and I think the film captures that greatly. And so, yeah, it's a very, I think it's a very overlooked film, but I hope there's more to be heard from this filmmaker. So that is Antoine Bourge's Concrete Valley. Yeah. And Öykü, what is your number 9?
Maybe I'm being too political, like they did in Berlinale this year, like of this picks in the awards. The film I picked for this was Orlando, which was made by an author I really admire, Paul Preciado. He writes about this gender issues, transgenders, gender issue, psychoanalysis, French philosophy, like a really prolific writer. And this film is actually about Virginia Woolf's Orlando, about adapting Orlando and thinking and commenting on it from the point of view of a trans narrative. And like there's so many layers in this movie about adaptation, not just about literature to film, but about an author using another artist's texts. Like how do, as an artist, we approach to another artist's? And I think how the way the artists employ kind of a violence in order to create something is really prominent in that film. And I really love that idea. And I also loved how Preciado made an analogy between the transition of himself and the other people involved in the movie, all with the transitioning of an idea to the work itself as like a becoming something, like a transition as becoming a film, becoming a book, becoming an artist, becoming a person. And it's these all layers up one after another. And like it's really worked for me. Like everything I love about artwork, cinema was there. So even though it was a bit of a messy for a first-time filmmaker, I really cherished it when I watched it.
But perhaps may I ask you, because I also saw you had still some criticism on that film too, no? About like binary depiction of East and West, I think. I think I read that on your...
Yeah, I think like it's been a while. Like I think it was in February when I watched it. So I have to maybe come back and think about these. But I think the moment when Orlando's transition starts, it's when like the transition process starts for Preciado is when he travels to the East. So maybe like the criticism I remember from that, to have this East as a kind of sort of a transition of like an eye-opening aspect in the story. Like my understanding of East wasn't like that, but of course, like everyone has a different interpretation of that. But yeah, it felt a bit exoticized for me.
I was gonna say that's presumably just taken from the novel, right? That's the yeah. I think what I liked most about the film was how the sort of interviews with the trans actors were integrated with almost verbatim text of the novel, and so at times you couldn't tell whether they were talking about themselves or the characters they were playing, and that sort of illegibility was like really interesting, where their sort of autobiographies like mingle together. Yeah, as you say, it's like maybe a little bit. It was maybe a little all over the place for my taste, but there was definitely something there that I found interesting. Should we move to Eliana's number 9?
My number 9 is Blackbird, Blackbird, Blackberry by Eleni Naverian. This actually works very well off of Orlando. I haven't seen that film that you just talked about, but there's something about it that appealed to me, in that it was a representation of a woman living in a rural area, a small village. She's 48, she's older. It's just the type of these types of women, there's a role model in film, if we think of it in this sense, has been absent frequently. And I think that seeing someone who is older, in some sense, discover her sexuality, but do so in what the filmmaker has also referred to as an instinctive feminist. And I like this idea of instinctive feminism, because it also is to say, okay, so are we also taught feminism now perhaps, and is instinctive feminism could be something, just understanding what the values of being alive should be like. And I think the film is very endearing. Stars a woman who has just such an incredible face and has a comedic aspect to it that I think could be easily missed. It also emerges in some sense from, Patrick mentioned it earlier, right? A mythological Georgian folktale, and the film is based off of a book that of the same title. And it was something that escapes just what our idea of womanhood is. I think also off the back of a lot of films in previous years that have discussed regret over motherhood. And this is a film that is exploring the milieu of someone who has chosen not to be with someone, which I think is still, there's a lot of territory to be explored there.
And just wanted to jump in there because, like, as you were saying, the subject of feminism, like when we look back this year, this feminist films that were mentioned are always with like a Poor Things or Barbie, where this beautiful, really idealistic depiction women are always really present. But here we have a really like a normal, ordinary body, and like a really assuming herself as an individual and discovering herself in a rather hostile social environment, and which this kind of bullying comes from women themselves, like kind of a representing the self-loathing, the way the older women are kind of thought to think like that. Like when you get older, you have to kind of project your hostility to yourself, to others, so that you can cope with these problems. And I'm curious also about this folktale because what I thought about this mythical aspect was when at the beginning of the film she goes to pick blackberries, and this kind of depiction of eating the forbidden fruit, she kind of falls down, but also
she has a near-death experience.
And then it makes her come back to life again. So my interpretation of the mythical aspect was that, like, is there another layer of that I don't know about? Maybe if you guys
and perhaps I wrote on that film, so I do somewhat remember the myth there, or like the mythological element. But the thing that struck me especially is that if you remember, she had a brother who died, and this brother had a very strong hold on her. Like he was the force in her life, and she was sort of under his control to some extent. But in the story now, like in this film, he appears now only as a ghost. Like she imagines him at some point, and he becomes only a story. Whereas in the mythological text, he's an actual character, and he portrays certain qualities, and he has a certain aura there, where here it's all a second degree thing. So I found that interesting in itself. Yeah.
Who's next?
It's Lawrence.
So my number 9 is the Victor Orife film Close Your Eyes, which I know Öykü is not a fan of, but nevertheless.
If a film makes it on a higher point in someone else's list, then we will skip it for now. And for me, it will come later. So let's talk about that.
So
later.
Okay, so your number 9, Patrick?
That is Claire Simon's Notre.
But
so
then
you have to skip
that too.
So it's on Öykü again, right? Number 8.
I'm like really special expert of choosing films that nobody chose. This one also passed quite unnoticed by lots of people. I've never seen this film in any other people's top 10 list this year. It's Riddle of Fire that I saw in Cannes this year. And actually, like Lawrence, probably you'd remember, like I bought this Cahiers issue in Cannes. Like it was, I think, May issue for, and there was this image that I thought it was from a French film. at the beginning, but it was actually from Riddle of Fire and in Kaye's cover, and it really struck me even before watching the movie. And then I watched it, and I was so impressed by the authenticity and the clever creativity behind this. It's just it's like a fairy tale. Like there is 3 kids who wants to play with their PlayStation, but their mom, like there are 2 siblings and the other one is their friend, and their mom tell them like, no, you can't play it anymore. Like you have to stop. It's too much. And she tells them like, I'm too tired. Maybe if you can bake me a pie, I'd allow you to play it. So it just starts with that. And there's this really kind of aesthetic of maybe a medieval, I'd say, aesthetic, really mixed with American countryside, American culture. And I really enjoyed this kind of mixture between fairy tale, contemporary American family dynamics, but also these really random people, where the children try to bake a pie and go on adventure and meet different people. And there's a princess. There's so many different and funny and quirky things in the movie. It was such a beautiful experience for me. And I mean, maybe it's not the perfect film, but it's there, and I don't think I'll forget that movie. And I think that's what it counts, right?
Yes.
Nobody watched it here, so we can move on.
No, I actually watched. I watched it because of the still that was on the Kahie cover. I think I would say I enjoyed the first half of the movie where they're just like playing around. I love when they go to the grocery store and they get the ingredients, because they're basically looking for the ingredients for this blueberry pie, but they're very specific ingredients. And at some point, it requires them to find like a speckled egg or something, and it leads them into a forest. It leads them into an encounter with this thing called the Enchanted Blade Gang or whatever. And anyway, it goes in a direction that I found harder to go with, but for maybe half of it, I really enjoyed it. What about you, Eliana? What is your number 8?
Oh gosh, okay. Number 8. So we've already broken the system because it seems like I put Yannick down for number 8, which means
you failed us.
No,
we didn't pick it up, but that means Lawrence, you'll give us.
Okay, my number 8 is the Hong Sang-soo movie that was at Fortnite in our day. So this is Hong's second movie of the year, and I think maybe the lesser liked one. I think some people quite liked In Water, but In Our Day seems to have been the lesser appreciated one. But I think
do you think that's because it is so personal that people think that's like the more, I don't know, more mature Hong or something?
Maybe. I mean, it's definitely, you mean In Water, right?
Yeah,
like it's more personal.
About his vision, right?
Yeah, I think it has a more upfront visual conceit in that, well, it's like the images are out of focus. And so it's more polarizing in the sense that more people loved it, and some people really didn't like it, but it was doing something quite different. Whereas I think In Our Day got a bit more of like, oh, this is just Hong doing his Hong thing again. And I can understand that, but I think what I appreciated is that basically the film alternates between these 2 different stories. And I think the question here is, well, how are these stories related? And I think that's sort of where, I don't know, my like commitment to having seen all of Hong's movies like comes to the fore. Is that like you think about something like Ha Ha Ha, where you have 2 people talking about their vacation, and you have a kind of flashback structure there where you're alternating between them, and they don't realize that they've actually been in the same place interacting with the same people. Whereas here, the 2 stories are completely separate. How are these related? Is it happening in the same day? Are they even in the same world? Like and there are these like weird synchronicities in the plot that lead you to ask questions about how these 2 stories are connected, but they never quite link up. And so there's always this sort of, I don't know, kind of parallel aspect to them that never collapses. Like there's an interest in each story that is sort of maintained throughout, that there's no like cause and effect between the 2 stories, never really comes into play. And so it keeps the kind of mystery of the film alive, at least for me.
Yeah, to me, that was also one of the perhaps if it was just about, pleasure of being together at a film festival, that was perhaps my highlight this year at Cannes, because I was basically sitting with 6 or 7 people in a row seeing that film, and they were all, I don't know, chanting and enjoying it very much. I don't have that source of, knowledge on his filmography. I've only seen, I don't know, 6 or 7 of his films, but not all the 20 or 30 or what have you. But just on a very pure experience level, I liked that quite a lot. And I mean, I've seen a lot of people just narrowing it down to, I don't know, enjoy yourself, like not despite, but for your idiocracies and all your little things you cannot, what to call it, like the alcohol, the smoking, he's not letting go of it. And in the end, the film makes it a point that perhaps it's for the better to him. And that's a very basic reading of mine, but I've found that pleasant enough.
I've only drank 2 Hong Sang-soo films, and so I think my palate has yet to develop. I do remember the cat, Uri.
I do love the cat.
But I don't remember much of the film, which is... But you have given reason to revisit at some point. But I'm not sure where to start with a Hong Sang-soo retrospective, because, Patrick, seeing only 6 or 7 films sounds like a lot. But that is also, I suppose, he's made over 40. Is that or
maybe,
not quite?
Maybe closer to 30, I think. I don't think it's quite at 40 yet.
Okay.
So Patrick?
Is that me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. For me, it's the number 8, Victor Erice. So now, Lawrence, you may. Because I must say, there was just somewhat similar to the Hong. There was, of course, you can, Victor Erice is such a big name for cinema, his first film since 1992. And then there was this scandal as well at Cannes that we covered at some point. It was all very annoying. But the film itself was just so heartfelt. It was so, without overdoing it, it was as horrible as that sounds. It was about the power of cinema, and how you can sort of, if you should doubt that sort of idea or not, the film at the end doesn't seem to do so. But yeah, there is the sort of framing device that I like as well. The film starts off with this excerpt of a film that is found, and then a journey starts. And as so often in cinema, it's about either the lost object or the lost person that needs to be found. And we follow this person who lives a very withdrawn life in a trailer park, basically. Was it in Spain? Does he live in Spain?
Yeah, it's somewhere on the coast, I think.
Yeah. And there's so many things that I think cannot quite get together again because I couldn't find my notes on this film, and then I'm a bit lost. But there were a lot of little details I like. There's a very emotional scene at a bonfire where they sing a song, my pony, my rifle, and me, or something like that. And there is this sub-thread of the film where a book is found that was once exchanged between 2 lovers. And there are these very meticulous small scenes that sort of in their entirety, they form a bigger picture. And I don't know what else to say, because I must say I don't remember so much of the film, but the things I do remember, them I remember strongly. So yeah.
Yeah, actually, I wrote on this film for CinemaScope, and so I was forced to, put together some sort of argument. And I think what I find most interesting about it is, I don't know, the sort of power of cinema thing. I don't really approach the film in that way. I think what I find most moving about it is that it is about how does one make a film after the medium has built up a kind of history. Basically, how do you make a film where everything you put in, every kind of gesture you will put in will recall something from the history of cinema? It's like, it's very natural for us to, when we see something, it's like, oh, that was like that film, or that was like that film. And it's like, at the end of the film, there's this miracle that happens. And it's like, oh, you think of Or Dead, or you think of Dryer, or whatever. And so, it's like, it's about kind of the burden of making a film once cinema history is already in place. And how do you go on, keep on making things without falling into a kind of cliche? And I find like the scene, the My Rifle, My Pony and Me scene, that's obviously the famous scene from Rio Bravo. And I mean, for me, that's kind of catnip. But really what is moving about the film, I think, is sort of finding new ways to make a film, and what does novelty really mean in this sort of day and age? And I think grappling with that question in the way that it does, I found very moving. But maybe Öykü can now share her misgivings about the film.
No, because like after hearing what you said, I think it would really feel like I'm being cynical about it, because and I mean, it's really heartfelt that you just mentioned that it's really like I reach after so many years making a film, and also the inevitability of this references everywhere. And I think I kind of felt bad about it right now, of expecting something really different or complete, I don't know, masterpiece. I don't know what masterpiece means, but like as if we're so hungry to this new things from big names such as Ulrich or Godard or I don't know, Costa, that every time they make a movie, we have this inherent expectation that it should be good, right? And that's why I kind of feel guilty about my expectations for this movie as well. But what I didn't like was actually this nostalgia that you mentioned about cinema, which obviously I felt was really something I have seen many times, especially the scene in the movie theater in the end. But at the same time, I understand and I respect. But also, I watched this movie in Cannes. Maybe I wasn't in the mood. Maybe I should give it another chance. But what I felt was that it was a bit archaic in its form. Yeah, I mean, that's why maybe it didn't work for me. And I couldn't get to the point of realizing that maybe it's inevitable while I was watching it. Like I didn't approach, and maybe I didn't show this kind of understanding towards the movie. I wasn't really open. So that's why maybe I should give it another chance and have another approach to it.
No, it's I think I was rather positive on the film when I first saw it, and it's curious, not as positive as you, Patrick, but I was curious to hear this extra layer, Lawrence, that you're adding, because so it just gives me the image that I'm left with is of this sculpture, this Janus looking in both directions, and then sort of seeing this perhaps as a split, maybe with your new input of the future of maybe not cinema, or then the past, but then also just how to be split in such a sense where everything is together. Can also work with nostalgic elements too.
But perhaps, it's also interesting how he sort of, on a formal level, tries to avoid it with these very digital, images that contrast so strongly with how the movie starts. There was, of course, a conscious choice as well, right? To not give us these nostalgic images just on the pure cinematic level.
Yeah, I think for me, the sort of where we open with these like very clearly film images of this movie, and we don't really know yet that it's a film within a film. Like I expected this to just be the movie, and so when the transition comes and you're like, oh, actually, this is a film that he made, that this filmmaker is supposed to have made years ago. That was a bit of a shock, and I think that goes to goes to show partly like that expectation. It's like he's an old filmmaker. We expected him to make this kind of a film, right? And so that sort of refusal of that expectation, I think, sort of helped me understand that that even though it is engaging with the history, it's maybe not just sentimentality there. Yeah. Should we move on to number 7?
So
then
you have put this as your
Los
number?
Delincuentes?
Los Delincuentes?
Yes, it's my number 3.
Okay, so we have to skip,
And then it's me again.
and then it's you again.
Okay, I think we're now finally at Notre. So I think it was Patrick's number 9, right?
Yes, that was my number 9.
This is also, I think it was the first movie I watched.
But I think it's my number 5.
Okay. So let's move on. Let's move on.
Okay, who is it now?
I guess that's me. So my number 7 is, it's a very long title, The Feeling That the Time for Doing Something Has Passed. So this is the Joanna Arno movie that was at Director's Fortnight or Cannes this year. And I think the plot summary, such as it is very simple. It's like there's this 30-something Jewish woman played by Arno, the filmmaker and director, and she just is into sort of BDSM relationships. And so she has these relationships with various like masters in quotes. And I think what I find interesting is that your sense of time passing, as the title kind of suggests, is very like, it's very hard to tell when the film is moving forward and when it is not, because your sense of her behavior is in these really weird situations. And so you don't actually know how, like what she's like quote unquote normally, like what is her usual behavioral kind of sense. And so you have one of my favorite scenes of the film is this, montage with music, which you usually kind of in like a very kind of cliche film, you would have that be, oh, this is like, you're seeing like these big changes that are happening in a person's life over like a very compressed period of time. Whereas here, your sense of like forward momentum is very restricted, partly because you don't really know how she behaves like from day to day, or like what is her behavior and what is her just sort of acting in these different relationships as like a submissive sex partner. And so that's what I found quite interesting about the movie. Yeah. Did anyone like? I think other people had seen it as well.
Yeah. I was also.
We talked
thinking,
on this podcast on this film.
Yeah.
Oh right, yeah.
But it was the only film that you hadn't.
Oh, it's true.
At that moment, I haven't seen it. Yeah. So I was thinking about this aspect of stagnant aspect in her life as well, because like even we sense it in the rhythm, but also I think this kind of low key, nothing is changing aspect is also present in her personal and professional life, which is kind of reflected in the relationships as well, right?
But it's funny because her professional life actually does move forward. Like you don't expect it, but she actually like moves up in her career.
But it happens it doesn't really impact you. Like, as you said, like we don't see any huge difference in her lifestyle or anything. It's just like,
no, exactly. That's what I mean. It's like there is this big shift, but it almost comes at you by surprise because you don't really understand like what she's like normally. And so it doesn't seem to change your sense of her transformation. Like whatever transformation is there seems to be detached from this, like, I don't know, rise in her career. Yeah.
And also, if I'm not mistaken, there's this episodic narration with kind of creates a disruption between the continuity of events that kind of also disrupts the temporal flow of what and when it's happening.
The chapters are the lovers.
Love, exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting. Okay. She in an interview with Mubi, she said that she sort of took inspiration a bit from Tsai Ming Liang in terms of like the sort of very the static compositions, the interest in bodies. And it's not a comparison that I would have thought about while watching the movie, but I can sort of see like a little bit of that in the sense of like, obviously their styles and I think their sense of humor is quite different, but in terms of how the compositions are very static and don't really guide our attention and just like allows like the bodies to be in the foreground. It's like, how do they act? How do they respond in these different situations is sort of where the interest comes from. Yeah.
maybe something to add to to the point of being the submissive character with her masters, like this level of not knowing who she really is also, there's another level that comes from the fact that the filmmaker herself is playing the main role, because I think inevitably we also think about like her as the character, like is there any, I don't know, aspect of her own being in the character, like as a filmmaker she's also present there, right? I mean, it can be read as a layer there in her character. I think
into the auto-fictional.
I mean,
I would definitely recommend her previous film, I Hate Myself, smiley face. There's a smiley face in the title. And it has even more of this autobiographical sort of meta aspect to it, and like the structure is like super interesting. I think it's under an hour, I think, but I would definitely recommend it if you like this film.
And didn't that play at the Berlinale? Do I remember correctly? I think she won a prize though, but I don't know if it was that film or a previous short film.
I'm not sure. I mean, I think that was her first like closer to feature length. So it's quite possible
perhaps,
that was the film. So what about your number 7, Patrick?
My number 7 is Bas Devos' Here.
Okay, so we can skip that.
That's Öykü, yes.
Okay, we have I think common film, Patrick. It's Bonello's La Bête.
That's correct, yes.
I think I remember talking about this film with you. If I'm not mistaken, in Venice?
Yeah,
no?
Yeah, we did.
Like talking about, it's really interesting. I'm not sure what I feel about this, but it really intrigued me. And so I kept thinking about it. And I'm like, I really want to watch it again to that point. It's such a inspirational and weird storyline, even though it's maybe for some people think that it's cliche of this, like a partners meeting in different periods of time in their lives, and this character remembering their past relationships to forget in the near future. I'm just mixing everything up, but it's actually inspired by the story by Henry James, The Beast in the Jungle, which is also adapted to another film by Patrice Chiha, La Bête dans la Jungle. Chiha. And
which played at the Berlinale, yes.
Yeah. What I liked about La Bête is the sense of instability, and this kind of instability and fear that kind of represents our own contemporary period of time. Just a feeling of anxiety or not knowing that what will happen in the future, and this kind of anticipation of events that I constantly feel in my daily life. And I thought while watching the movie, I thought it really captured that feeling of this weird anxiety that I'm incapable of describing, but I feel constantly. And I also really love the humor of the film, especially in this in the second level, I think, like in the contemporary current timeline, where this obsessed right-wing guy tries to harass the Lea Seydoux character. I really love their interactions in that time period. But I was also curious about how would it be if the male character would be played by what was the guy's name? Oh my god!
So the person
I constantly thought about that while watching it. So how was your impressions?
Yeah, in a way, for the first hour or 40 minutes, I wasn't sure what this was going to be. The film, I didn't have any information going in. So I was surprised, finding just the sort of period piece. But then it developed. Of course, it starts with this very impressive opening scene that is Lea Seydoux in the green screen, and she's sort of to understand where she's situated in the room. I don't know if it was for a commercial or a bad film, like a bad horror film or something, but there is this, she is supposed to react to a monster. And this was such a great film to start it. And then it sort of slowed down to an extent that I at first didn't quite understand. But the more the film went on, the more I understood what he's up to, or like I felt I get a sense of what he's up to. There are these three time levels of 1910. That is at the time when Paris was flooded, completely inundated, and the streets or the alleys are deserted there. Then we have 2014 and 2044. Yeah, what you said, of course, it could so easily become this cliche, right? That you have this love that persists throughout time. But I think Bonello explores this in such an interesting way, because the constellation permanently, it ongoingly, it changes between the two. And the desire that is of such a different nature as we see them in different time periods between these two. And also it felt like such a continuation of Coma, really, because these poetics that you sort of mentioned of disruption, I would even say of glitch. There's a lot of glitching going on in that film. And I saw it in other films as well. Of course, when we talk about The Human Search later, there's also this element of glitch. And I think this instability has become, or this had developed into our time, that everything seems so unsteady these days. And I think his take on this is, I don't know many other filmmakers that can capture horror so well as he does these days, even though that doesn't do explicit horror films. And I have not seen House of Tolerance yet, but I wonder how this would also sort of contribute to my understanding of this film. And there are still these ongoing preoccupations of his with the puppets, for instance. These puppets appear in all the films I've seen, in Nocturama, where they sort of evoke this moment of shock. Yeah, they instill this moment of shock that one just resembles a mannequin in a shopping mall. And then in Coma, you had the Barbies. And I think it was for that movie that he actually very spontaneously had Uriel on board, because he spoke the Ken or something. He voiced Ken or someone there. And yeah, I think there's nothing I can compare that to. And I had a very strong response to it, and I think I will think about that film again. And I hope it doesn't end up like Coma, which I think is still without distribution. You can hardly see that film anywhere. So yeah.
And also, like, I kind of felt the same way as you did with this first part, I think. And what made me come on board was the second part, which I kind of thought was similar to Inland Empire, or maybe Mulholland Drive in some way, maybe a kind of a Lynchian delirium. I don't know if anybody else thought about it like that, but also about this instability in narrative. I think we also feel that in characters' depictions, because even though Leia's character kind of stays the same, the guy is not really the same person in different timelines. And I also love that aspect of, like, who's this person? Like, in every different timeline, he behaves in different ways. And I also felt really kind of irritated, and like, what will become of this person at the end, kind of anxiety, and like, because normally characters are things that like a channel and carry the story, right? So you kind of instinctively trust them, or like, because they carry the story. But here he was so unbalanced and incoherent between timelines that it felt like, where are we going with this guy? Who is this person? And that was also really interesting that I haven't seen in many films, except for maybe psychological thrillers, like where it's really obvious.
Yeah, but I'm really interested now in hearing Lawrence dragging our euphoria down on that film, because you were not such a big fan of this film, right?
No, but I should preface by saying that I was like very, very, very excited for The Beast. Like if there was one film this year that I wanted to see most, it was Bonello's The Beast. And I don't know, I don't want to judge such a tricky film so quickly, but for me, it didn't really seem to do anything that I hadn't seen him do before already. In fact, I thought you compared it to Coma, and in some ways, I thought Coma already got at all this kind of anxiety and this sort of like better. I think.
But that's interesting that like this is the project he just pursued because he couldn't do his big film that was, La Bête. And it says sometimes interesting, isn't it, that these sort of projects you squeeze in are sometimes liked more by people. That reminds me of Sean Baker's, what was his last film again? What's the name?
Red Rocket?
Yeah, Red Rocket.
Red Rocket, yeah.
That was not the film he wanted to make at the time, right? He wanted to make a much bigger film of much larger scale, but Red Rocket ended up one of the films that, like perhaps for me, serves one of his strongest films so far. But
yeah, I think it's his best. But yeah, no, it makes me think a little bit of the sort of the Wong Kar-wai with Chungking Express, which he made very quickly while he was editing Ashes of Time. In any case, like I think the sort of experience of I like the layering of the different time periods, and it's similar into the layering of time that you find in Coma, I think, with the different sort of layers. It's like there's the Barbie, there's the room, there's the Patricia Coma's like YouTube channel, there's like these dreams, and they all sort of intermingle, and I kind of like that.
The letter as well.
Yeah, the letter, the sort of the framing device,
yep.
Right? I think if you go back and visit House of Tolerance, I think there's also that sense of like the way it plays with time is interesting. I won't give it away, but the way sort of you're in this very enclosed environment, but sort of the way the movie emerges from that environment is like really striking. Yeah. Anyway, should we move on to Eliana's number 6?
I think it's mid-December, thus it's your turn, Lawrence.
Okay, yeah, we will move on. So my number 6 is Forms of Forgetting, the Burak Çevik movie, which was in Patrick's honorable mentions. I think it's like a really striking movie in very many ways, made with very minimal means, but the kind of essayistic sort of aspect to it is like really interesting. I don't know how to sort of put it. Like I did write on this film as well, and so it feels weird to just sort of repeat the things that I wrote about. But it's kind of about how, every time you kind of try to grasp on to this sort of present moment, you seem to be thrown back in this like past moment, and I find that you seem to be like go back into memory. And I find that like sort of interaction goes throughout the movie. I think the most striking element is when you're seeing these two people talking about when they first met and their relationship and how they almost got together. And then eventually you have the layering on top of that of them at some point later in the future talking about that moment where they're talking about to each other, and sort of that kind of like you have to keep track of all of these layers of time throughout the movie in these very different situations. So there is this sort of these two actors talking, but there's also, I don't know, just a shot of the ice and something pulling out, like someone pulling out a net out of this ice fishing hole. And then at some point there's like, I don't know, an image of an elephant like trunk at some point. I think there's like images of like a window being broken down, and just the way these sort of images sort of resonate with the image in text, I found quite striking. Yeah.
Yeah. Perhaps because Öykü, you are acquainted with the filmmaker, no?
Yeah.
Could you perhaps tell a bit more about that?
I mean, since Burak is my friend, and I also like the French subtitles for its projection in Paris, I don't know how many times I watched this movie, but I think I also enjoyed the most this layering of dialogues. And when you think about the actors in real life and how their relationship also kind of projects itself into the movie, it becomes something else. And I also love its relation with the spaces, and because there's this scene when we go to the shipyard, when the movie's in, like, we have the shots from the shipyard, and it's not about the memory. It's not only about memory of people, but also about places and non-humans that it's around us. Like I remember this line about the metals transfiguring and having these memories. How was that? There's a line about metals and how they try to get back to their original forms every time. And like, that makes you think about the memory we see around us, that exists around us. And I also, while watching it, I also thought about Deborah Stratman's Last Things, which is also about the memory of the rocks and the non-human beings that's around us. And that also resonated with that film. And Burak also made a special projection in this modern art museum in Istanbul, where the movie won't be projected anywhere for 40 years from now on. And I think it's so inspiring to think about, after 14 years, what will remain from this movie, like thinking about it, because I mean, we're bound to forget it, but the fact that he assumes the forgetfulness in the movie also invites us to think about it more, right? It's kind of a paradoxical thing, because it's like a film that tells you that you're going to forget it. And like, paradoxically, it makes you think about it more. Yeah.
Such a cheap trick, isn't it?
Yeah. No.
Oh, but just a very mundane question here. So the fact that this film recently popped up in my letterbox as having been seen by someone, does it mean that person went to Turkey, or does that mean that person had a screen out that is? Yeah.
I think he won't show it in Turkey. Like, I don't know if there will be any other projections around the world. I don't think he will show it in Turkey. So.
Okay.
Maybe it's a Turkey special.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but I really like that too. Just, I think this is a film that is very much tied with the memory. I met you right outside of the film screening before I first saw it, because it came to Paris. And just the idea of promises that are tied to places, and in this projection of perhaps never happening, and promises that are broken, and also the imagery. And that's still, for me, I remember now that you've summoned the imagery again, Lawrence, of these things, and just the relics and some runes, and looking out for when things were single or when things were doubled, as if this world is all somehow united in another sense, and while we are all forgetting together. And then other little details come through, like the disputes about what color the dress is, or who was wearing what, or the intentions as well. It's a very lovely film, and I'm glad it was highlighted. Okay, we're going to take a little break right now, but thank you for joining us for part 1 of our top 10 films of 2023. In part 2, we'll discuss our top 5 films. Stay tuned.